Hi, good afternoon, Rob. How's it going?
All right, Michelle, good to see you.
Good to see you too. And I'm excited about today's topic. It's kind of our origin story in retail.
That's right.
Um, we've decided to talk about our fathers and their experience in retail. You talked a little bit about it in your LinkedIn post when you launched the program, how being in the distribution warehouse really influenced you and all the other aspects of retail you were involved in. So, can you elaborate more about that experience?
Yeah, for sure. We talk about retail being more than just an industry, more than a job, and it's literally in my blood. Yeah, my father was in retail for, gosh, 4 or 5 decades, running distribution for folks like Hit or Miss, which got purchased by TJX, Loehmann's, Phillips Van Heusen. And I grew up working in his distribution centers. Of course, when it was legal, because, of course, there's a minimum age with the risk associated working in a distribution center. But even the early days, I was really intrigued by the process, the operations. And, my dad kind of got mad at me because I'd point out a lot of inefficiencies in moving product through the supply chain. But I understand, Michelle, that we have some things in common, and you have a heritage as well in retail.
We do, yes. My father started his retail career after his exit from the Army. An employment agency placed him with CMC Music. So he was a sales associate. He loved audio equipment, selling it to people, getting them to enjoy music better. So we always grew up with stories about different types of products, different bands he would put on during his retail days. And then unfortunately or fortunately, the hours didn't really coincide with a marriage. So he went to merchandising in audio equipment and eventually ended up at a large electronics manufacturer, the official name Matsushita, but people probably know them by the brands Panasonic and Technics. And he would still work Black Fridays in the holiday season as he was starting out to earn extra money. So I've always grown up with the stories of his retail expertise, and then when you turned over to the supplier side, we always had the greatest gadgets. We had things that were out yet that we get trials to learn how to sell better. So yeah, it's been a huge influence on my career too.
I was one of the first kids on the block to get ColecoVision because at the time my father worked at Zare, and don't tell anybody, but I also got 2 Cabbage Patch Kids when you remember like that was all the rage and you couldn't get it around the holiday season. So do you still have, or your father still have, any turntables? I mean, gosh, they're back in again. Maybe you kept them all.
Yeah, he did. He got a special make that only 500 were made in the world, and he dusted it off and upgraded it. And all of the children went down one Christmas when he went to show it off, and I put dibs on it when in the will. But there will be a fight over that for sure. Yeah, he's got some great stories. I'm sorry, what was that?
Well, you're his favorite from what I understand, so you should be locked in. You're all set.
I hope so. But yeah, we were the first to have Laserdisc, if anyone remembers Laserdiscs, and 3DO video games. So great, interesting stories from the supplier side of all of these innovations that they were coming out with, and they would involve obviously their business development people in the research process. So he was just so fascinated with the whole process and shared that with the family.
That's awesome. That's great.
Yeah, and another thing that we did is so once he was on the supplier side, he still kept in touch with a lot of, or in particular, Ray from Sight and Sound. He's an independent audio equipment retailer in St. Louis, where I'm from originally. And every time we were in town, we'd always go and stop by Ray's shop and they would catch up, and they're still in touch all these years later, decades later. It really speaks to the community of retail, not just within retailers, but the relationships between suppliers and retailers themselves. So I've always really admired that. It's always great to see Ray. He's amazing. He actually came up to Chicago and installed my dad's audio system.
That's all. You talk about community, and some of the earliest memories I have my father, before the pandemic, like me, would travel a lot, and he'd be visiting suppliers and distribution folks in the industry, but also trade shows. And it's kind of amazing. One thing I haven't done, which he spoiled me, was always bringing back the tchotchkes from the trade shows. And I haven't done that to my two sons and trained them to expect anything really good. But I also remember all the philanthropy that he did, where we would go to different events, whether he was being honored or we were donating to some cause. And again, it just speaks as we're diving into becoming retail, the community aspect and really embodying purpose to have an impact not only on your own business, but the industry and the world around us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my dad also did a lot of traveling, a lot of trade shows. He remembers when CES was in Chicago and not Las Vegas. So when I got to speak at CES a couple of years ago for the first time, he was very proud. And I've relied on him a lot as an advisor. When I became the head of retailing at Euromonitor, I would often bounce ideas off of him because the retailer and supplier relationship is so intertwined. To be able to call on him and get his advice or his perspective on things was great. Has your dad kind of been an advisor throughout your career?
Oh, absolutely, both formally and informally. I think he, models great behavior, just personally and professionally. Waking up every morning, he'd say, have a positive mental attitude, PMA, and that really drives me a lot of time. But also, again, the connections he's made. When people would actually send physical letters, I actually came across some of those, whether it was folks that he had in the trucking business or other partners, and the personal connections. I mean, if you think about the amount of time we all spend on the road, and these personal connections mean a lot. And, whether by happenstance or probably a little bit of him rubbing off on me, I consider so many of my colleagues in the industry actual friends as well. And I also think about my kids, if they're going to take up retail. It wasn't like I was all about, I'm going to go to school for retail. I'm definitely going to go into retail. I happened to fall into it, in the early 2000s in the .com boom, leading e-commerce at Lids. But as I got more and more into it, my passion grew more and more. So I wonder what, I'll pose this to you, Michelle, as we close this out. Like, what does the next generation look like? What do you think the new leaders, the new aspiring, if there are such folks, retailers look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I was inspired. I watched our video again with Ashley, our intern, and she's actually studying business analytics and retail merchandising. There's all of these more formalized programs, I feel, nowadays for people to understand different aspects of retail. So I think there's a lot of education available now that wasn't available for us or even our parents in the industry. So that's exciting. And again, business analytics being key. Like, I can't imagine what it was like doing monthly forecasts and planning in the 80s, right? I remember my dad bringing home the big white on one side and green and white ribbed on the other side. And it was like, discarded notes, and we would color on the white side. So that was like how they did it, and now everything's mobile. There's all this instantaneous real-time data. So yeah, I think the skill set will also change in some ways as far as the tools that you have to use. But some things will remain, like the importance of collaboration and communication. There are definitely things that, we've identified as principles that I believe are timeless. And what about you? What do you envision what do you see your kids doing that you think could translate to a career in retail?
Well, it's funny. We talk about technology. My father implemented the first flat sorter in the United States. I remember him going over to the Netherlands where it was manufactured and brought it back. And it really created a lot of efficiency. But if I think about it, the supply chain hasn't evolved as aggressively as I would have expected. So when I think about next generation and my kids as an example, I really think especially accelerated by the pandemic that we will see more automation, more intelligence put into the entire supply chain. Gosh, we have to figure out a more profitable way to get products from the retailer or brand to the doorstep of the consumer. So it'll be interesting to track. I do feel like we see this acceleration in digital transformation, and I can't wait to hear how others have really come along in their journey to becoming retail.